And magnificent Marta motors into the quarterfinals here in Brisbane. Oh, that was some win against the number 3 seed, Amanda Anisimova, who was in sparkling form last night. But fast forward 24 hours, and she's been dumped out by Kostyuk. And that is a win that means a lot.
Amanda Anisimova held the US #1 ranking for approximately 5 minutes before it all came crashing down in Brisbane. Her shocking second-round blowout loss to Marta Kostyuk handed the ranking right back to Coco Gauff, without Gauff even needing to do anything special. The WTA rankings just flipped again. And the timing couldn't be more brutal for Anisimova, who watched her career-high ranking disappear faster than it arrived. Here's what I want to know. Is Amanda Anisimova's quick rise and immediate fall proof that rankings don't actually mean anything? Or does this loss reveal she wasn't ready for the pressure that comes with being the top American? Drop your thoughts below, because this situation is messier than anyone expected. Let's set the scene here, because the drama is absolutely delicious. Amanda Anisimova had just overtaken Coco Gauff in the WTA rankings to become the US #1 for the first time in her career. It was a huge milestone, a career-defining moment, the kind of achievement that gets celebrated and analyzed and treated like a major breakthrough. She reached a career-high world #1. 3 ranking, sitting right there with the absolute elite of women's tennis. The narrative was already being written. Anisimova's comeback from her mental health break, her incredible 2025 season, and now her ascension to the top of American tennis.
Well, I'll tell you what, if that is a sign of things to come.
And then she walked onto the court in Brisbane as the #2 seed and got absolutely demolished by Marta Kostyuk, 6-4, 6-3 in her second match of the tournament. Just like that, the US #1 ranking she'd held for maybe a week handed right back to Gauff, who didn't even need to do anything particularly spectacular to reclaim it. Gauff was already provisionally ahead in the live rankings, and Anisimova's Brisbane loss made it official.
Desperate defending from Kostyuk, but it didn't pay off.
The timing is genuinely brutal. Anisimova had 0 points dropping off her ranking this week, which means she had every opportunity to extend her lead and solidify her position. Brisbane was a WTA 500 event where she was seeded second, giving her a legitimate chance to earn up to 500 ranking points and create some breathing room between herself and Gauff. Instead, she crashed out in round 3 and watched her brief moment as US #1 evaporate faster than morning dew in the Australian sun.
And magnificent Marta motors into the quarterfinals here in Brisbane. Oh, that was some win against the number 3 seed, Amanda Anisimova, who was in sparkling form last night. But fast forward 24 hours, and she's been dumped out by Kostyuk. And that is a win that means a lot.
Let's talk about the match itself, because this wasn't some competitive 3-setter where Anisimova fought valiantly, but came up just short. This was a straight sets loss where she got outplayed from start to finish. Kostyuk controlled the match, and Anisimova never really found her rhythm or figured out how to turn things around. The score, 6-4, 6-3, tells the story of someone who wasn't ready for the moment. The pressure of being the #2 seed, the expectations that come with being the newly minted US #2 seed. 1. The spotlight that follows every move when you've just reached a career-high ranking. It all seemed to weigh on her, and Kostyuk took full advantage. Now, to be fair to Anisimova, she started the Brisbane tournament strong. She absolutely dominated Kimberly Burrell, 6-1, 6-3, in her opening match on Wednesday. She looked sharp, confident, and ready to back up her new ranking with result. But then the Kostyuk match happened, and suddenly all that momentum vanished. Welcome to professional tennis, where you're only as good as your last match, and rankings can flip in the span of a single afternoon. Meanwhile, Coco Gauff was over at the United Cup, grinding through matches and racking up ranking points without any of the pressure that Anisimova was facing in Brisbane. And here's the thing about the United Cup. The ranking points available are complicated because they depend on the ranking of your opponent and how far your team advances in the competition. Gauff's 2025 United Cup points came off her ranking this week, which is initially why she dropped behind Anisimova. She officially held 6,273 points, compared to Anisimova's 6th. That 14-point difference was enough to flip the US #1 ranking, creating this whole dramatic narrative about Anisimova's rise. But Gauff kept playing, kept competing, and kept earning points back. She lost to Jessica Buza's Monero of Spain in round-robin action, one of those losses that people will probably forget about in a month. But she also beat Argentina's Solana Sierra and picked up a big quarterfinal win over Maria Sakkari of Greece. That Sakkari win was particularly important because Sakkari is a quality opponent, and beating her meant earning solid ranking points that brought Gauff back ahead of Anisimova in the live rankings, even before the Brisbane loss made it official. Now the United States has advanced to the semifinals of the United Cup, which means Gauff has even more opportunities to earn ranking points and extend her lead over Anisimova. Every match she plays, every win she secures, it's all adding to her total and making it that much harder for Anisimova to catch back up. The irony here is almost too perfect. Anisimova had the clearer path to extending her ranking lead, a WTA 500 event, where she was seeded second with a relatively favorable draw. Meanwhile, Gauff was whale with the unpredictable team format of the United Cup with its complicated point distribution system. Yet Gauff is the one who ends up back on top, because she kept winning while Anisimova couldn't handle the pressure of her new position. Let's talk about what this ranking switch actually means going forward, because it's not just about bragging rights or national pride, although those things definitely matter in American tennis. Next week's WTA rankings will determine the seedings for the Australian Open, which is the first Grand Slam of the year and starts on January. Both Gauff and Anisimova are expected to be major title contenders in Melbourne, so their seeding positions matter for their draw and potential path through the tournament. However, and this is where things get interesting, the ranking switch between Gauff and Anisimova won't actually impact their Australian Open draws at all. They're both in the same seeding group as the 3rd and 4th seeds, which means they'll both be drawn in the same half as either seed Aryna Sabalenka to Iga Swiatek. So whether Gauff is number 3 and Anisimova is number 4, or vice versa, doesn't change the fundamental reality that they're both going to face one of the absolute best players in the world before the final if they want to win the tournament. In other words, all this drama about who's the US #1 doesn't actually change their Grand Slam fate. It's basically bragging rights with no practical benefit for the Australian Open draw. But that doesn't mean the ranking doesn't matter psychologically, because it absolutely does. Being the #1 comes with expectations, media attention, and a certain level of pressure that not everyone handles well. Anisimova just found out the hard way that wearing that crown isn't as easy as it looks. She had it for maybe a week, walked into Brisbane with that new status, and immediately crumbled under the weight of expectations. That's not a great sign for someone who's supposed to be ascending to elite status and challenging for major titles. Meanwhile, Gauff has been dealing with this pressure for years now. She's been the face of American women's tennis since she was a teenager. She's handled massive expectations, media scrutiny, and the constant comparisons to past American champions. This isn't new territory for her. So when the ranking flipped back in her favor, it probably felt like things were turning to their natural order rather than some major accomplishment. She's been there before, she knows how to handle it, and she's proven she can win Grand Slams while carrying that burden. Anisimova's 2025 season was genuinely impressive, and nobody should take that away from her. She came back from a mental health break that could have ended her career, rediscovered her game, and climbed all the way to world #3. That's remarkable regardless of what happened in Brisbane. But this loss raises legitimate questions about whether she's actually ready to be the top American, or if she just had a great stretch of results that inflated her ranking beyond her actual ability to handle the pressure. Because here's the thing, truly elite players don't lose in the second round of a WTA 500 event where they're the number 2 seed right after reaching a career-high ranking. Elite players rise to those moments. They embrace the pressure. They prove that the ranking is deserved by backing it up with results. Anisimova did the opposite. She folded exactly when she needed to show that her new ranking was legitimate and sustainable. Now, one loss doesn't define a career, and it's entirely possible that Anisimova will learn from this experience and come back strong. Maybe this was just a bad day at the office. Maybe Kostyuk played out of her mind, and there was nothing Anisimova could have done differently. But the optics are terrible. You hold the number 1 ranking for approximately 5 minutes, walk into your next tournament as a major seed, and immediately lose in straight sets. That's not the statement you want to make about your readiness for elite status. The contrast with Gauff couldn't be starker. While Anisimova was choking under pressure in Brisbane, Gauff was grinding out wins at the United Cup despite dealing with her own challenges. She had a bad loss to Bauss Ismanero, one of those matches she probably would like to forget. But she didn't let it derail her tournament. She bounced back, beat quality opponents, and helped her team advance to the semifinals. That's what elite players do. They don't let one bad result spiral into a complete disaster. They recover, refocus, and keep competing. And now Gauff is back on top of American tennis, with a chance to extend her lead even further if she keeps winning at the United Cup. Meanwhile, Anisimova is heading home from Brisbane with nothing to show for her week, except a humbling loss in a ranking that's about to drop again. The WTA rankings are notoriously volatile, and we've seen players rise and fall quickly based on a few tournaments.
But there's something particularly brutal about reaching a career-high ranking, becoming the US number 1. One for the first time, and then immediately proving you can't handle the pressure that comes with that position. It makes you wonder if Anisimova's ranking was more about a hot streak than sustainable excellence. Did she actually improve enough to be a legitimate top 3 player? Or did she just have a stretch of favorable draws and good results that temporarily inflated her ranking? The Brisbane loss doesn't answer that question definitively, but it definitely raises doubts. Because if you're genuinely operating at a top 3 level, you don't get blown out in straight sets by Marta Kostyuk in round 3 of a WTA 500 event, where you're heavily seeded. Now let's talk about what this means for the Australian Open, because both Americans are going to show up in Melbourne with very different psychological states. Gauff will arrive as the US number 1 again, which is familiar territory for her. She's dealt with these expectations before. She's won Grand Slams while carrying this burden. She knows she can compete with anyone when she's playing well, and her United Cup performance suggests she's in decent form heading into the first major of the year. Anisimova, on the other hand, is showing up after a devastating loss that cost her the US number 1 ranking and exposed potential vulnerabilities in her mental game. She's going to face questions about whether she can handle pressure situations, whether her ranking was deserved, whether she's actually ready to compete for Grand Slam titles, or if she's just a solid player who had a hot streak. Those questions will follow her throughout the tournament, and how she responds will tell us a lot about whether her 2025 breakthrough was real or just a temporary spike before returning to her normal level. The Australian Open draw won't be any easier for either player regardless of who's seeded 3rd or 4th. They're both going to have brutal paths to the title. They'll both likely face either Sabalenka or Swiatek in their half, and surviving that matchup will require playing the absolute best tennis of their careers. But mental state matters in Grand Slams, and right now Gauff has to feel a lot better about where she stands than Anisimova does. What's particularly fascinating about this whole situation is how quickly narratives can shift in tennis. Just days ago, the story was about Anisimova's incredible rise and her breakthrough as the new US number 1. Analysts were discussing what this meant for American tennis and whether Anisimova was ready to challenge for major titles consistently. Now the narrative has completely flipped. Anisimova is the player who couldn't handle the pressure of being US number 1 for even 1 week. Gauff is back on top where she belongs, and everyone is questioning whether Anisimova's ranking was legitimate in the first place. That's professional tennis for you. You're only as good as your last match, and rankings that take months to build can disappear in a single afternoon if you can't back them up with results when it matters.
The really brutal part for Anisimova is that this loss didn't just cost her the US #1 ranking. It cost her momentum and confidence heading into the biggest tournament of the early season. She had a chance to prove that her ranking was deserved by performing well in Brisbane. Instead, she proved that maybe she's not quite ready for this level yet. And now she has to go into the Australian Open, knowing that everyone will be watching to see if she can bounce back from this disappointment, or if it's the beginning of a slide back down the rankings. Meanwhile, Gauff gets to show up in Melbourne as the US #1 again, with all the confidence that comes from reclaiming that position and knowing she can handle the pressure that Anisimova apparently couldn't. Amanda Anisimova's Brisbane collapse handed Coco Gauff the US #1 ranking on a silver platter and exposed serious questions about whether Anisimova can handle elite pressure. 1 week at the top and she immediately crumbled. That's not how champions respond. If you think rankings reveal who can actually handle the moment, hit that like button and subscribe for more no-filter coverage of tennis drama.